today's webinar. Oh, sorry about that. We're recording. Today's webinar is how to recruit and retain the next generation. It's co-hosted today by myself from Manitoba Trucking and Supply Chain Manitoba. My name is Jessica, and I am the Sector Council Program Manager with MTA, and I'm joined by Cliff Tam, Member Services Coordinator, and Carrie Chan, Marketing Communications Manager with Supply Chain Manitoba. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that Supply Chain Manitoba and Manitoba Trucking Association are located on Treaty 1 territory, the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Innu, Dakota peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge that the work we do takes us through the ancestral lands of many nations. So in 2025, 27% of the workforce will be Gen Z. Are you prepared for it? To answer that question, we're joined today by presenter Hannah Dannecker, managing partner at the Better Together group of companies. Hannah is an author and a public speaker, and she works to break through the barriers to connect to generations with one another. She works to connect candidates and employers for better employment opportunities, and she connects with people to find the information they need to help themselves make the choices that will benefit their own futures. Cliff?
This section is being recorded and will be published on both the Manitoba Trucking Association and Supply Chain Manitoba websites. During the section, you can use the chat and Q&A functions to ask questions. We will hold those questions until the specific speaker is done. And now, I'm happy to turn the presentation over to Hannah.
Thank you so much, Cliff, Jessica. I'm so excited to be here today and to be talking with all of you. I am going to just diminish all of you in that chat to the side so I can't see anything, but if you have anything at all, please feel free. I think if you put your hand up, I should still be able to see it. But yeah, we will come back to all of the questions on the other side of the presentation. So please feel free. And I know that all of you have a Gen Z in your life, so don't be afraid to ask me the questions. I want to answer them. I want to work through this with all of you. But thank you so much for having me today. It is such a pleasure to be able to connect with groups like you all, and specifically about this topic. I've come to speak about a couple different things in different ways, but this one always for me is so much fun, and I just think has so much impact on the other side. So I appreciate that you're all interested and looking to learn and here to do so. I've started this presentation a couple of different ways before, but what I'm going to ask you to do today, and normally this is way easier because in a room of people I can see everybody raise their phones up, but what I'm going to ask you to do is take that nifty device you've got, put it on silent, and then put it in your pocket for me, if you wouldn't mind. I know specifically in environments like this, it's so easy to double screen and to have all of these other things around us. And specifically for all of you in transportation, you've got your dispatchers reaching out to you, you've got your drivers who can't get into the load, you're terrified and things happen quickly. And so if you have to do what you have to do, please feel free to do it. And this is much more important for me to say to you than for you to do. And I'll explain why that is as we go through the presentation. But if you wouldn't mind, I would really appreciate that. So today we are here to talk all about Generation Z. Generation Z was born between 1997 and 2012. There's 72 million of them, and I am so blessed to be one. I love being of this generation, and I love being able to speak about this generation and help other people understand kind of who we are, why we work the way that we work, and what that means for all of you as our employers, how you can both get us to work effectively with you and how you can collaborate with us in a way that really helps everybody get the most work done, because that's what we're all here to do, right? So Generation Z, we are going to talk about a roadmap to a bought-in generation. Now, there is this one funny word, the concept of insanity. There's a definition that most people are pretty familiar with in terms of this concept of insanity. And this would be that insanity is doing the exact same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. I often think that in transportation, we are a fairly solidified group of people. We like to do what we like to do, and I think that most of us are pretty solidified in the ways that we work. But unfortunately, we are looking at an environment where we are missing drivers. We are missing young drivers, and we're missing drivers in general. And so one of the important things that I want you to do today is just try and take a big step back from everything that you've been taught in regards to hiring the next generation and come at it with a different perspective. And this is important because I worked with the NPTC and looked at some of their benchmarking surveys from 2024, and the average age of a new driver at this point in time in 2024, sorry, this is from their last survey, their new ones going through right now. If you want to see it, you can come to the NPTC event. I'll have new data for you. But for right now, it is 41 years old. And as of 2023, the year prior, it was 40.9. And so we haven't seen any changes in the age of drivers that are coming in, which means in some ways we are acting insanely because we're doing the same thing and we're getting the same result. So what can we do to completely shift gears, to change it up? Well, I'm going to ask you to take a different perspective for me today as we go through this presentation. And perspective is so challenging. My husband and I, we sit outside every single day and we share a tea daily just on our back porch. And for a long time, we were living downtown Orlando. We had this great little apartment. And when we would sit outside, I would sit on the right side of the patio. And I would sit facing this direction, looking at him. And when I would tell people about our view from downtown, I would explain that we can see the beautiful skyline. I would explain that I could see Disney and I could see the fireworks from Disney at night. That was really cool. I could see I Drive, which is this little special spot of Orlando that has this really cute little wheel. And that's what I would talk about. But then Grayson, my husband, you see, he sat on the left side and he looked to the right. So when he talks about what our view used to look like, he would talk about seeing the lake that was downtown and the highway in the background. He would talk about seeing the airport in the distance. But his perspective and my perspective on the very same thing were very different because we sat in different seats. And so I've come to this situation from a very different perspective than all of you. Most of you have 20, 30, 40 years of business experience, and I'm coming in from a different generation. I've got 10 years, so I'm not completely wet behind the ears, but I'm not you, and I understand that. So I'm coming from a very different position, a very different perspective, a completely different generation. So what I'm going to say today might be a little weird to some of you, and I would encourage you to let it resonate before you discard it. Just to accept that this might be a little funny, but we're going to work through it, and I hope that this will be really, really helpful for all of you. So what has your experience been like with Generation Z? Maybe some of you have seen them from a distance. Maybe you're watching me right now and you're like, I just don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand them. Maybe some of you have worked with them. You know, I've got one of my Gen Zs in my office right now. She's sitting across from me. She just gave me a nice little one of these, something that a bunch of you probably wouldn't necessarily understand in a communication forum. But for me, because I know her, because I know the way that she works and the way that she talks, I know that that was her being like, yes, happy to be here, so excited to be in the room, thankful for the opportunity to listen. But a bunch of you might have gone, well, that might have been a little bit weird or a little bit strange in a work setting because they're different than we are. They communicate differently than most. And so what does that look like? Maybe you've seen them in a work setting and you're like, I don't know some of the words that they're using. Or maybe on the complete opposite side of things, you've never worked with a Generation Z and perhaps you have kids or you have nephews, you have grandkids, you have people that you've seen, the person that checks you out at Target and you're like, I just don't understand. Sorry, you guys are in Manitoba, you don't have Target. And that checks you out at Walmart. My apologies. And so maybe you've had a lot of experience, maybe you've had a little bit of experience, but today what we're going to do is we're going to work through who they are, why they are the way they are, and how we can collaborate the best with them. So like I mentioned, Generation Z is born between 1997 and 2012. There's 72 million of them. They go by lots of names. They go by the Zoomer generation, the Rainbow generation, Generation Solo, but the way that we will refer to them today is by Generation Z. And Jessica was 100% correct. So this year, right now, there is 27% of the workforce accumulated by Generation Z, which is insane because so many people think back to 5 years ago when we were talking about millennials. And millennials were still relevant, but they were by that point most certainly managers. And Generation Z is this new crazy generation that has come in. And so I'm so thankful that all of you are here to talk about them and learn about them so that we can work with them very effectively. But, as I was putting this presentation together for the very first time, I really wanted to gauge the room. And I'd love to gauge the room with all of you. I'm interested to see if I can have the chat feature pop up. But if you could write down for me in the chat feature, I think all of you will enjoy seeing one another's. What's the first word that you think of when you think of the next generation? And I'm going to share a few with you that I gathered, but I'd like to know, if I can, kind of the room. Let me see if I even just stop sharing for a second. I bet you I could see everybody. We have one chat. No question, no words. No one has anything. There's 31 people here. There's no words that anyone can think of when they think the word Generation Z. Come on, I'm gonna wait for one. Relaxed. Okay, good. Carrie, thank you. I appreciate that. Does anybody else have anything that comes to mind? Anything else? It can be good, it can be bad. All humans are humans. We just participate. Okay, no, that's fine. I'll
So
share
we do have someone who pointed that they want a regular work week with no overtime.
a regular work week with no overtime. Oh, that's what their desire is?
Yes, I think that was the statement about to that particular generation. No overtime, regular work week is the desire for the generation.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I would say that that's a fair representation of what a bunch of people would want. And so that it doesn't surprise me that that's absolutely a part of
We
Generation
have
Z.
another one that says catered to. Um,
Okay.
this new generation is vital to help us understand the importance of work-life balance.
Okay. Love it. Thank you guys. Thank you. I appreciate
Trendy was another one. That's a good one.
Great. Jessica, I'm not sure how you're seeing these. I
Oh,
tried
it's under the
stopping.
Q&A function. Sorry, Hannah.
No,
There's the
that's
chat
okay.
and the Q&A function going. So we're
That's
using,
okay.
yes, yeah.
That's great. I'm so glad for them to come in. I don't need to be the one to see them. Thank you for sharing. So that's wonderful. So you're absolutely right. That's a great representation of what we're going to see. We're going to see this next generation really flip up the work-life balance. We're going to see this generation really work on boundaries. It's going to be very interesting. But so the first time I put this presentation together, I wanted to ask a bunch of people this question. And so I, naturally went to my social media page and I put it up there and I got a lot of responses, but that wasn't enough. And so I went to a coffee shop and I sat down at a Starbucks. And for about 8 hours, I sat in every single person that asked or that passed me. I asked this exact same question. And so these are the words that I received. The big ones are the ones that I saw most, and the small ones are the ones that I only saw a little bit. So I heard tech a lot. I heard screwed a lot. I heard inclusive, I heard driven, I heard lots of potential, curious. So as I was looking at this list, as I was first starting and gathering it, I understood that there were some phenomenal things about this next generation, but there were also some things that we were going to need to work through as their employers to help them along and be the best employees that they could be. But really, before we dive into this, I think you might all be sitting there going, Hannah, love this. So excited to hear about it. But why the heck are we listening to you? What gives you the spot to come and stand in this position where you're chatting with us? Well, I would love to share this very quick story with you. So there was a while ago, I went to university as a normal student does. I started my university career and I absolutely hated it. I finished one semester at Liberty University and it just was not for me. And so I transitioned, I moved home. I was living back in Barrie, Ontario, if any of you are familiar with the area. I was working three jobs that equaled out to a full-time job, and I was in school full-time. And so I was working about 40 hours a week and I was doing school about 55 hours a week, and I had about this much of a social life. But I loved all of my jobs, so it really made it great. I stayed home, I saved all of the money I possibly could. And then I was like, what am I going to do with all of this? And so when I was 19 years old, I decided that I wanted to move to Florida. And I was lucky enough to be a dual citizen. So I had this opportunity and I found a random stranger online and I moved to Florida. I moved in with her. I'm actually now in the same exact neighborhood that I moved into, but a couple houses down the road. So this girl moved into her home. I apologize. I am working from home and I do have a dog. So if he goes off, I apologize, but Grace is here to help save the day. So I moved into this random stranger's house and I met her, and she was a wonderful person, and she gave me some equipment. She was a professional wakeboarder, and she taught me what I needed to do and how I needed to do it. And I started wakeboarding regularly and competing, and I started competing in world championships. Like, it was not just some small thing. I absolutely loved it. I took home second. It was pretty great. But through this experience, I was working again, going to school still full-time, and I was a substitute teacher. And I was working with the next generation, and I worked with a bunch of different ages. I started in kindergarten, I worked my way all the way through 12th grade. But I absolutely fell in love with children and teenagers and the concept of helping this next generation come to be who they were going to be. And all of this was fantastic, and life was picture perfect, and I graduated, and then COVID happened. So the pandemic hit, and I went home for a little while, and I did what I had to do to start in my little isolation bubble back there for months at a time. And then I was like, well, family, love you, but I do have a job commitment. So I traveled back and forth for a little bit of time, and I tried to make it work. But realistically, I was looking for a full-time job. And what I was looking at in this moment was what most graduate students are looking for, or graduated, pardon me, students are looking for in this moment. They're looking for a full-time job, that's salary, and is consistent. And what that looked like for me, the reality of that was that on average, you get 2 weeks of vacation, right? You start with 2 weeks of vacation, and typically that's granted after your first year. And so you can borrow your first week into your first year. But with 1 week of vacation in my first year of work and 1 week of vacation in my second year of work, I was looking at going home to see my family and 14 days of quarantine every single time you passed the border. So this equation was not working for me. I was like, this means that I will not get to see my family at all for the next 2 years. And so naturally, I made the decision. I was like, I cannot stay here. This is not reasonable. If there's any time to enter a family business, it is in the midst of a global pandemic. So I moved myself on back to Barrie, Ontario, and I was really excited about this. I want to be so crystal clear. This was my choice. I moved into an apartment by myself. I was the first female in my entire lineage to get to live alone. I mean, this was an insane blessing. I had a phenomenal job in the midst of the pandemic, which not everybody got to say, and so that was a blessing. But there was this one day I was driving down the road, commuting into work, and the sky was gray above me, and something was playing on the radio. I don't really remember. And I was bawling my eyes out. I was crying so hard because I was so hurt that this entire life I had worked really hard to get to had been completely ripped away from underneath me. So I was driving down the highway, ready to go to work, just in my little suit, crying my eyes out. And I looked over to my glove compartment and I saw the glove box. And I knew that my passport was still in my glove box. Now, I knew that because I always left it there as this little safety piece, as this little, you said we're going to help you with boundaries and with working on our work-life balance. I kept it as this little mental health piece of this is my out, and it's always there should I need it. I never needed it. I never should have used it. There was no real reason, but I did know that it was there. And in this moment, I looked at it, and it took every ounce of my being to not call my mom and say, Mom, go pick up my dog. I'm so sorry. I can't do this. I've driven through the border and I'm now in the US. It took everything in me to pull off the highway, to park my car, to sit at my desk, and to do the 9 to 5. But I did it. I did pull off. I did go to work. I did continue working, which allows me to be here today. But the reason that I did that was because my last name was on that door. And so what can you do with your Gen Zs to help keep them there when they're not a part of the family business? How can we make it work? Well, we made it work, and we made it work very well because my father, our president, is a phenomenal listener. And that's why that perspective shift is so important. But before we get to that second piece of the story, what we're going to do is play a little game. And so you guys can all do this. You can all think about it internally and play the game yourselves. Normally I would have call outs, but I don't want to make Jessica come off and be calling out for everybody. So in 2025, what percent of the workforce will be Generation Z? We've already talked about this a couple times. I think most of us will get this. It is 27% of the workforce. So if you think about your office today, right now, is 27% of your workforce Generation Z? And if it's not, why not? And how can we get it there? How many hours a week do you all think that Generation Z spends on their phone? This is crazy. We see them pretty frequently, you know? Mine's still within arm's reach. I still got it right here. I sleep with her every night. How often do you all think that we're spending on our phones? We are spending 45 hours a week on our phones, which is crazy. Are you kidding me? 45 hours a week? That's as much as the average person goes to work. That's wild. And what does that mean for us? Well, we'll learn all about this as we continue forward. What percent of Generation Z says that technology affects their decision to work for a company? This one's really interesting. We got 72, 65, 91, and 52, but the correct answer is 91, which always blows my mind. 91% say that technology is going to affect their decision about where they're going to work. But what does that mean? Does that mean the gamification in their phones? Does that mean the actual hard software? Well, we will learn all about that. What percent of Gen Z says that there is a better way to get an education over a post-secondary degree? You know, millennials were the most educated generation to date. They are a smart, brilliant, educated generation. What about Gen Zs? I would say that we are still smart and very independent, but most of that is not going to come from a post-secondary degree. And so we'll talk about what that looks like for this generation and why, but 73% of them say that there's a better way to get an education than a post-secondary degree. Now, this one always shocks lots of people, and I'm going to define the concept of sexual fluidity for you. So sexual fluidity is the idea that a person's sexual orientation can change over time. In this one, what percent of Gen Z is sexually fluid? That is 48%. And that is a very high statistic for a generation. And so what does that mean for this generation? What does that mean for the employers? Well, we will learn all about that shortly. And what percent of Gen Z says that they care about their longevity at a company? I love this one. This one always throws people. People will go like 15, 28. No way, it's higher than that. It is actually 90% of Generation Z that says that they care about a longevity at a company. But maybe this is just smoke and mirrors, right? Maybe they just know how to talk to us, how to tell us what we're looking to hear. So what percent of those Gen Zs say that they actually want to stay at their current company? It would be 70% of them, which most often gets a ooh from the crowd, which is what I'm audibly doing from all of you right now, because this is crazy. When we think about that, what does that happen? Why does that happen? We're so used to most of our employees looking at the other side of the grass and saying, that is so green over there, and I can't wait to walk into it. So why is Generation Z this way? Well, we will most certainly learn about it. But first, I'm going to finish my story for you. So I got off the highway, I parked my car, I went into work, I worked day in and day out and day in and day out. And I went and I saw my father, our president, and I said, Dad, I love you. I love this business. I cannot continue doing what I am doing though. I will not be able to continue moving forward with the setup that we have now. It will ruin me. And so he said, okay, what do you need? And in that moment, in that actual meeting, what I needed was to work from home once a day. What I was doing was working in an office that had no windows, 5 days a week. I was in isolation in the middle of the pandemic. I was not allowed to legally leave my home. So I was going from my home to my office to an office with no windows. It was the middle of the winter in the pandemic in Ontario. So our sun was going up after I was in the office and it was coming down after I was out of it. I was straight up just depressed. And what I needed was a window, was some sunlight in that moment. And so he said, Hannah, go home on Wednesdays, work from home on Wednesdays. We'll figure it out. And I did. And that little shift was a catalyst to everything that came after that. But if he wasn't first able to listen from me and hear that I was unwell, I wouldn't have been able to get here today. And so that's why it's so important that we take a different perspective and that we listen. Because after that started changing, a bunch of stuff changed. We had an internship program that we ran. It was phenomenal. We have a ton of employees that rotated through. It gave me the opportunity to start talking and speaking about this next generation and has rolled into the situation that we're at today. But just maybe 2 months later, I was back driving down the highway, back in a car, crying again. And what was happening this time? Well, my music was playing in shuffle, and this will be funny for you. This will tell you about how old I am. In shuffle, one of the songs that came up was an Ashley Tisdale song from High School Musical. And what she was singing in this moment was, you need to bop to the top, like you won't ever stop, bop to the top. And so about an hour before this, one of our leadership somebody from our leadership executive team had just said to us, Dave, Hannah, McDonald family, love the Better Together group, love the business, but I need to step out. And so as he was leaving, we had decided that we were not going to replace him. That as a family, we were going to take a step into the role that he was. And that's when I became managing partner. But you see, as I was driving down the highway, that tear rolling down my face was excitement, was drive, was angst, was thrill. Was I scared? Perhaps a little bit, because change is scary and things are overwhelming. But so much more than that, I was so ready and so excited to take on the new challenges that were to come. But in those massive moments of major angst, what changed in the middle? Well, I was in a different country when it happened. I was in the US. This time I had moved to the US. We had completely changed our business to go just outside of Ontario and Quebec to across Canada and the US, which was phenomenal. So we had a massive change there. Everything looked different. And as everything looked different, it worked really, really well for our Gen Zs. And so we had a massive cycle. About 4 years ago, we started taking Generation Z interns, and one day we'll get Gen Alpha interns as they start coming in. But what we were finding is that this next generation was bringing a youthful energy and excitement back into our business that was bringing our entire team to a high driving personality. And it was really supporting just the dynamic across our group. It was phenomenal. And so as we had these Gen Zs cycling through, we had 90 of them finish their first semester. So not all of them finished, which is fine. We understand that not everybody is going to be super successful. And in transportation, most certainly not everyone is going to be successful. And so we had 90% that finished their first semester, but then 70% of them were like, hey, we'd like to come back. We think you're pretty smart. We'd love to learn again. And so they did. They came back for a second semester. And then at the end of that, 30% of them were like, hey, we still want to return, which was so exciting. And all of them that came back for their third semester were offered jobs and hired on full time. And so we've done a pretty good job about creating an environment that is not only drawing them in, but retaining them. And so what does that look like? Well, first, what we're going to learn about is what makes them Generation Z. So technology, human globalization, and COVID-19 are three of the major factors that make your Gen Z exactly who they are and why they are the way that they are. So we've got technology. We said that 45 hours a week is what they are spending on their phones, which is absolutely insane if you think about it. 45 hours out of your week, that is just about more than 2 of your days. And so what does that mean for employers? And 91% of them said that technology affects their decision to work for a company. Well, It means that this new generation is coming in with a very different set of skills than generations before them. And it's really exciting, actually, because no generation to date has come into the workforce where they all share the same exact skill. But that's happening right now. Generation Z is coming into the workforce, and every single one of them is adept to using technology. And so, what does that really look like? Well, that means that they'll be able to come into your companies and they'll be able to adopt pretty easily the tech that's already in your your tech stack. And so if that's your ATS, if that's your CRM, if that is a way that you're sending your dispatchers through logbooks, I'm not sure what tech it is, if it's Microsoft, if it's Google, if they're switching suites, they'll be very good at doing that, even if they're not familiar with what's already in front of them. But along with that, they will happily help you adopt new technology as it comes in tomorrow or 10 years from now. I had this one Gen Z, she was a recruiter. She was phenomenal. Her name was Anna, and we were going through a horrible ATS transition over the last 2 years. I don't know if anybody else has done one of these recently, but transitioning your software, not so much fun. But she loved it. She took personal time to learn about the system. And then in our morning meetings, she would come on and she would ask if anybody needed anything or if they needed help learning about how to use it. And she would just by choice choose people who were looking for help. Sorry, they would ask for help. She wouldn't choose, but she would choose to help them and take her own personal time to do so. And most Gen Zs are like this and will be like this for the future of your technology. So what you bring in, they'll also be happy to help teach people in your organization, which is so exciting for you. But along with this, they are very much a YouTube DIY, let me look it up myself generation. And so I had this friend, her name was Laura, and she's a sweetheart. She's a couple years younger than I am. And when we were in high school, she told me that she wanted to make a tiny house. And she goes, Hannah, I have this crazy project for school. You have to do a senior project. I've done everything I can do. I've done the duct tape wallets. I've done the cute flowers out of macrame. She did all the arts and crafts humanly possible. And then she decided that a tiny house was her next project. And she did it. She bought a trailer, she built it up from the very ground base. She had never taken a wood shop. She had never been interested in anything like this. But just from watching YouTube videos, she was able to complete this tiny house that she lived in for almost 10 years. She moved into it with her husband and then their first baby, and then they sold it so they could have a down payment for their first place with their second kid. And so she, out of nothing, created, just because she had the resources in her back pocket. About 2 minutes before we hopped on this call, I went on ChatGPT. I'm working on filling out some beautiful W-9s for an RFP. It's so exciting. But when I was looking at it and I was trying to fill out the information, it was like, you have to help me understand what you're filing as. And I didn't quite know because we're scheduled as one, but we submit our taxes as the other. And ChatGPT gave me the answer that I was looking for. I first initially went to go call one of my coworkers to be like, hey, could you? But when they didn't pick up, I was like, hey, that's actually fine. I don't need you. ChatGPT can help me answer this question. And so a lot of your Gen Zs are going to be like that. They were born like that. They were raised like that, and they will be like that in their jobs. And that's so exciting for so many managers because it's going to take a lot of your time out of your day just because they'll be self-sufficient. And so technology is phenomenal. But what technology are we using? Back from the same NPTC, we're using 89% of us are using the internet. And what I want to talk about here is the concept of internet, that this was the overarching field here. What I would encourage you to do is go, are you using Instagram? Are you using TikTok? Are you using Monster? Are you using Indeed? Are you using Pinterest? Are you using, there's so many, Google Jobs, are you using, there's so many. It's literally like, I can't stop coming up with ones to put on this list. And so while it is impressive that yes, we are using technology to find them, I want us all to be thinking really intentionally about what technology we're using to find them and making sure that it's actually working, not just a post and pray, which isn't doing anybody any favors. And so think very specifically about the tech at your company. I also just want to mention tech doesn't just have to be gamification. You know, so many of us are thinking about this whole, okay, well, Duolingo's done it best, right? They've made it fun for this next generation to learn. And so many of us are thinking, well, does that mean that that's what our, like, is that what we have to do? No, no, not at all. What I want you to be thinking about is the cell phone that I'm handing this person, does the battery work on it? Is it going to die in 45 minutes after they take it from unplugged? Is the internet really slow on it because it's 15 years old and it just takes too long for the software to work? I want you to think not only about what's within the screen that they're looking at, but what the screen actually is, to make sure that the equipment that they're using is functioning as fast as their brains. Because if the equipment that they're using is not functioning as fast as their brains, it's going to become really challenging for them to continue forward. So there's a ton of different ways that we can think about and talk about technology, but we are sure that it has most certainly affected this next generation and what they're going to be for us as employees. Now we've got human cooperation and globalization. I have this one friend. She's a sweetheart. She has, my goodness, this really cute little apartment. She's in Washington now, I believe. She has an adorable boyfriend. He's so cute. She has this really nice rug that she recently put in her living room. It's got these blue flowers on it and pink flowers on it, and they swirl in these really cute ways. Now, I haven't actually spoken to this friend in about 5 years. And some of you might be going, well, Hannah, how do you know all of this information? Because of social media, because of the way that humans are now cooperating across the globe. I met her as a child. We are now very much into our adult lives. I have not seen her in person in nearly 20 years. But again, I would still deem her as a friend. If I was driving through her hometown, I would call her up and I would most certainly try and grab a coffee with her. So what does this mean about this next generation? Well, because of social media, because of the way that technology and human cooperation and globalization have combined, we have a very different perspective about what connection and community really looks like. And so this next generation is going to be phenomenal at creating relationships from a distance and long-term relationships out of nearly nothing. And so it's really exciting as we think about our account managers and our salespeople, those individuals that we want to send out and knock on doors. It's crazy to consider, but they're going to be so good at those roles because they have so much experience with keeping a Rolodex of contacts, pardon me, that continually rotate through for relationships. And so they're going to be really outside of the box thinkers when it comes to stuff like this. They're not going to just show up as a salesperson with a portfolio and go, "Hi, I'm so excited to talk to you." They're going to do that, and then they're going to stalk them online and find all their information. They're going to reach out every single day. They're going to send them LinkedIn messages. Maybe they'll send them a piece of mail. Maybe they found their address. They're going to show up repetitively again and again and in every different medium that they possibly can to get as much face time and face value. But not all of that is done just from knocking on the door to see if Bill is in today. And so they're going to be very different. They're going to work very different. And as we think about what roles they have to come into those company and contacts, is going to be really a phenomenal place for them to be. What else? Now we have COVID-19. I unfortunately hate talking about COVID-19 because it was just the most frustrating thing on the planet in so long. It changed so many people's lives. But what happened with COVID-19 is it hit when I like to call Gen Z baby adults. And so they were 20, let's call it 20-ish. They were 20, give or take 5 years. So they were just graduating high school, just graduating university. Some of them were just coming into high school and kind of through this range. But COVID-19 stripped a lot of experience from Generation Z away, and it's really affected them in a lot of ways. So for my personal graduation, you know what I did? I had my pajamas on. I was sitting on my couch, nice and comfy. I FaceTimed my parents, and as I FaceTimed my parents, I dragged my last project in, I submitted, submit, and I graduated with pimple cream on my face. I didn't walk across the stage. I did not shake anybody's hand. I did not get a diploma. I got my diploma in the mail about a year later. It took a really long time to come through. And so when we think about COVID-19, it really shook a lot of those fundamental experiences that a lot of Gen Zs were having in those years. And depending on where you are in the world, where you are in your country, and how close you are to different major cities, you experienced this very differently. And so for some Gen Zs, this was going to be life-altering, shaking, never changing. For some of them, this looks like a little bit more of a blip, and you're really going to see, depending on where they were, how much it affected them. But what it did for most of these Gen Zs is it gave them this massive craving to have stability and longevity, right? So we were talking about 90% of Generation Z says that they care about their longevity at their jobs. And then 70% of them say that they actually want to stay at that current company. Well, this is kind of what it's tied back to. When we think about that, and we also think about the fact that they were children when that recession was going on, and now there is this new pending. We'll not talk about the economy at the moment, but none of this is a solidifying, safe feeling. So for most Gen Zs, they're coming into this world and they're going, I need stability. I saw my parents seek it out when I was a kid, and I know that that's what I need to get today. And so that's why we're seeing this massive difference from the previous generation who had very different experiences. But along with that, there's a lot of stuff that COVID gave Gen Z that's going to be phenomenal and really going to help them as they escalate in their futures. You know, it means that they crave that longevity and stability, but it also means that they're really self-motivated. They sat at home, like I said, I submitted that last paper all by myself for years, and I was an online student for the majority of my education. So this was actually just a really true nature of what I wanted to be as a human regardless. It fit really well with my personal model. But everybody else that was a student was forced into this specific model where they were their own teachers, their own professors, their own guidance, their own friends, their own peers. And so for so many of them, they've become these really independent people who can count on themselves because that's all they had at different points in time. And so they don't necessarily need to reach out to their teacher. They don't necessarily need to reach out to a prof because that's not how they were raised. They were raised to do it independently. Now, this is going to be really exciting for lots of employers because, of course, it's going to mean that they're independent, that management looks really different, that they've got good organization skills, they've got that great time management skill. This is going to be really valuable for a lot of employers. But I want to be crystal clear, this is also going to be a bit of a challenge because this happened because of human cooperation and globalization, because of the way that technology has advanced. There's a lot of things that Generation Z has completely missed, a ton of very normal life experiences that we just have not been able to see. But you know, when we're looking this is a pie chart of all the different categories, all the different industries within transportation. When we're looking at this, we want to bring them in. We want them to be a part of us. But what they're looking for is the tech industry, sustainability, healthcare, creative and social impact, and non-for-profit. And you'll see why as we move forward, this really relates back to so many of them. But what are their barriers that we can help them overcome so that we can get them into these seats? Well, we see all the amazing ones, all the great, they're independent, they're opportunists, they're environmentally savvy, they're phenomenal employees. But we also see the hard ones here, right? They can be detached. They are screwed. A lot of places they're really challenged with money right now. They've been seen as lazy. We've got that word awful. Awful's pretty big there. There's a couple of people that definitely thought that. And so we understand that there are pros to humans and there are cons to humans too, you know? Every single one of you will fall somewhere in here. You've all got amazing pros to you. But everybody has things that they need help overcoming. And so, what is that for this next generation? Well, that is going to be communication of values, imposter syndrome, flexibility, and educational change. We're going to talk about all of them right now. So, communication of values. I told you all that 48% of Generation Z considers themselves as sexually fluid. Now, I tell you this to show you that we are just very different from the generations that came before us. The way that we've chosen to live our lives is very different from what other people have seen on standard. And 93% of Gen Z says that a company's effect on society affects their decision to work for them. It's funny, I was just at the Truck Expo a couple of weeks ago, and I was walking through the trade show, and I'm still fuming about this, to be so honest with all of you. Walking through the trade show, having a phenomenal day, taking one of my interns through, Ella, she's great. We're walking through, and this person looks at me. They say, "Hey, Hannah," or they don't know me, pardon me. They say, "Hey, would you mind helping me with this photo?" And me, being just the average person I am, I'm like, absolutely. Are you kidding me? You see a young person, you think that they're technically I was going to say challenged, technically capable, very ready, very excited to step forward. Yeah, absolutely. Let me take your camera from you. And as I stepped forward to take this man's camera, he goes, "Oh, no, 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 I want you to get in the picture." And I was like, "I'm sorry, pardon me?" He's like, "Yeah, I want you to get in the photo, you and your friend, to show my friend that he's got game." And so this, in my response was, "No, that's really weird. I'll happily take your picture for you though." But I tell you this to tell you that this next generation, we are still experiencing some pretty inappropriate workplace environments. And so that comment has left me, like I said, fuming for about 2 weeks. And to be so clear with you, that's gotten in my way of being able to do my job as effectively as I can do it. And so when we think about this communication of values, the way that the next generation thinks, they're looking for respect. There's so many things that were commonplace 20 or 30 years ago that no longer deserve a place in the work setting. And so as you're having conversations with this next generation, understand that the words that you're using are resonating in their heads. And if the words that you're using are disrespectful based on what they've grown up learning, it's going to end up with them being challenged to understand the direction that you're truly giving them, rather than hearing the funny bit or joke that you were hoping to have in the first place. And so just be very careful about the words that you use. I don't want you to be afraid to speak to the next generation. I don't want you to be afraid to give direction and be the best manager that you can possibly be. I just simply ask that you are incredibly intentional about the words that you're using and the way that you're communicating with them, so that you understand that how you're talking with them is letting them be as successful as they can possibly be at their job, because that's what they're there to do. And so I'm not going to touch a whole lot more on this. We'll kind of run right through it. But just be very careful with the way that you're communicating, understanding that what you say hits and stays for a very long time. And so now we've got imposter syndrome. 70% of people struggle with imposter syndrome. And I was really sad to see this. And I was really hoping that Generation Z was going to be different. You know, actually, Generation Z was supposed to come into this world. They were supposed to say, "Imposter syndrome, who? I've got this phone in my back pocket. I know exactly how to have a conversation." Or I can type it into ChatGPT, just like what I said. They've got all of these resources. But unfortunately, because of technology, because of COVID, because of human cooperation, our real life experiences have been stripped from us. And so it's funny. I gave this presentation a little while ago, and I had this table of Canada Post, just a bunch of people from Canada Post all sitting around, and they were chatting, and I was explaining that I really struggle to send mail. because personally, I just don't think it's going anywhere. I don't get it. I've never really had to do it. I understand you put it in the mailbox and it goes away, but then you just don't hear. You never get that little delivered notification. I've grown up understanding, I've seen delivered on every single one of the text messages that I've sent through for about 15 years. And so in my brain, the mail system just doesn't work. And they thought that this was hilarious. We had a phenomenal laugh, and I eventually was embarrassed enough to send out my thank yous for my wedding. But it took me nearly a year because I was so scared. Now, this chatting with all of you doesn't scare me at all. But that, just because it was something that I hadn't experienced, was terrifying. And how silly, how funny, how phenomenal for us as employers to say, wow, this next generation, they have these holes, these things that they've missed that are so simple that we can step in and help them with. And so this next generation, they are coming into the workforce with some imposter syndrome, with some fear. But as their employers, we can really help them fill those gaps and move forward. Now, flexibility. Oh, I love this one. 65% of employees say that working from home made them feel more connected to their coworkers. And this normally blows people's minds. They're like, what do you mean? 65% working from home? How is that even possible? But when we take into consideration that they were sitting from home from the time that they were children, like little kids, on Sims, on Minecraft, collaborating with other people from across the world. They were working and gaming and having fun, but learning to have these digital relationships from the time that they were little kids. And then again, that was reinforced when they were in school, in these now professional environments. We're telling them that that's what that was for them, right? School is a kid's job. So that was their professional experience of the most authority. The government was telling them that they need to go home, they need to be home, and they need to do everything that they possibly can from there. And so they've taken a very different perspective as to what the working world looks like. And flexibility is so, so important to them. In fact, 78% of Gen Z say that they would accept a job if flexibility was offered immediately. Not, let me go talk to that other person that I've been chatting with. Let me go check that email to see if I got a response. Let me try and reach out to that person I had an interview with. No, let me shake your hand, accept this job right now. And what a phenomenal stat to use to our advantage to understand that flexibility is so important to them. But what I want you to understand is that flexibility itself is very, very flexible. The way that you're integrating this into your Gen Z's working experience is so flexible. You could do a ton of things. You could give them flexibility in their hours. Maybe they wake up really early because they have to help their kids get out to school, or their siblings get out to school, or maybe they have a medical condition that wakes them up at 3 a.m. every single day, or maybe you never know what it is. Maybe that just they want to start early and end early, and that's easy. That's the flexibility that they wanted. Maybe they want to work from home once a week because they're depressed and they need a window just one day a week. That's literally all I needed. Maybe they want flexibility of the work that they're doing. Maybe they want so desperately to be a part of your organization and they can see the trajectory path, but the work that they're doing right now is mind-numbing and so challenging, and they can't fathom 2 years of this to get to that. Well, what if you give them just an hour of that where they are today? What if you let them sit with the person and let that person mentor them to grow into something different, to give them something excited about at the end of the week every week, or at the beginning or the middle? You know, what we do with flexibility is so flexible. I just ask you to not shun it away, not tell me, no, I can't be flexible. I understand that most flight attendants need to be on the plane. I understand that most truck drivers need to be on the truck, but maybe they could start at 4. Maybe they could start at 3. Maybe they could take an hour lunch in the middle to do a workout, and that's what their personal need is. I don't know. And there's so many ways we can do this, but we have to ask them first, right? We have to understand what it is that they're looking for. But as long as we understand that flexibility is one of those major things that we can hold on to as their employers, and one of those amazing tools that we can use it pretty well. Now, additionally, educational change. 73% of Generation Z says that there's a better way to get an education over going to university. And 66% of them say that they're very greatly worried about accumulating student debt, which is fair. Nobody wants to be in debt. I'm sure lots of us on the call are in debt and we freak out about it on a daily or weekly basis, or maybe you never think about it at all. But for this next generation, with this economy right now, with struggling so hard to get that extra 50 cents in their hourly pay so that they can go out and have one fun drink with a friend. I think that it's challenging. Most people continue to think about a perspective where you could work an extra shift every single Saturday. And if you worked an extra shift every Saturday, you could save enough to have the thing that you really wanted to do. Whether that's the crazy trip, whether that's the down payment for the home, whether that's I live in the US now, so the medical bills that you've got on your chair, whatever that is, that we lived in a world where it felt like we could get there. But now these Gen Zs are coming into a world where they don't know if they'll ever be able to move out of their parents' place and buy their own. They don't really know how they're ever going to own real estate and to excel into this next category. And so when they're looking at the things that most people have used to help themselves get there, they're saying, if I can't get there and getting that is going to bring me more debt, what is that going to do for me? Specifically, when we have all of this technology tucked in our back pockets that can teach them nearly the same information, not in the same way, but nearly the same information, but without the credibility. And so, what does this mean for us as employers? Well, it means that at some point in time, we're going to have to change the way that we're looking at education. Most people right now are hiring and you go, I need a bachelor's degree, I need a master's degree. You have whatever it is that you're looking for, and you're pretty specific about that requirement. But employers are going to have to come to the conversation with a little bit more perspective and say, help me understand how you know this. Help me understand, and that's my favorite sentence in nearly every conversation I ever go into, but help me understand what we're doing here and what that additional credibility can be. There's no reason that a driver can't come in and do a phenomenal road test and leave it picture perfect. And we can't help them create some sort of credibility. Now, licensing is licensing. I don't want to touch that. But training is very different, and we can help them gain this. And so we'll look at some alternative credibility as this next generation comes in, because at some point we are desperately going to need them, and we'll need to evaluate how we can change that. And so this is great. We're starting to see this. This isn't necessarily tied to educational change, but it's just tied to experience. We have gone down in the years of experience that we're requiring. This is again from the same NPTC. Oh gosh, what's it called? Benchmark is the word that they use to describe it. And you see we've gone from 1.6 years to 1.47 to 1.44. So we are changing our expectations from experience. But we're not necessarily getting everywhere that we need to go. So now that we understand kind of who they are the way they are and why we want them in our buildings as the employees, and we understand the challenges that they face as we're going through it, what do we do next? Well, I would encourage you just to keep pushing for a younger generation of drivers. We are seeing the average fleet not focus on hiring next generations. So we can see here just some of the tactics that they're using, and the next generation is not a part of it. And so as you think about your fleet and how you're bringing drivers forward, where are you looking for them? How are you finding them? And who are you targeting? What I'm asking you to do here, really, all of this, is mentoring over managing them as a generation. And so, what this looks like when we have a generation of people who have completely redefined the term influencer, they've changed it completely. What does this look like? Well, they've built up these massive walls around them because every app they've opened and every door they've walked into has had somebody who's tried to influence them in some way. And so what I want you to do is slowly, brick by brick, take all of the wall down. And so this is going to look like listening to learn, learning to understand, and then understanding to speak. But unfortunately, if we miss that middle step, it's going to become very challenging for you to have that relationship because they're going to keep their wall up and you're just going to talk directly at it. It's not going to be fun. So listen to learn, learn to understand, understand to speak, and that's when we have the opportunity to truly influence. I want you to think about integrating their why. You know, as I was putting this presentation together, I called all of my Gen Z employees. I said, hey, what is it that you do every day? What is going on? And one of them said, I send 50 emails and I call 50 people. And I was like, great, that's what you're doing. I get that. And then a couple other of them absolutely blew my mind away. One of them said, I create a space for people to come when they are vulnerable that helps them feel secure. Are you kidding me? That's phenomenal. I help create opportunities for people when they can't create them for themselves. Are you kidding me? That's phenomenal. And so we need them to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And when they understand that, it's so much easier for them to make those 50 calls than to send those 50 emails because they truly understand the value of the why behind it. And so you want to integrate their why. I want you to invest in them. And I want you to feed them something yummy. Now, this one is my favorite one. It's like dangling a big piece of steak at the end of every single week. You know, when I first started, I was our sales and marketing person. And so I did a lot of sales all week long. And then every single Friday for about 2 hours, I would sit down and I would do our marketing work. And this was so much fun for me. It made me so excited to work from Friday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Now, how many of you have interns that are thrilled to work on Fridays from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m.? Probably not that many, but if you feed them something yummy, if you dangle this fruit, if you continue to tempt them in some fashion, they'll continue to seek it out. And so what do you have that's valuable to you? Because I don't want to discredit their employees. They need to be doing work that is valuable, but that could be something yummy, something of interest for them. So you're going to feed them something yummy. And this is when you finally get to invite them to listen. When they're like, love this, drank the Kool-Aid, give me more. This is when you have the opportunity to say, hey, so I've seen this thing in you and I want to support you here. You could probably work on XYZ. Or hey, I need to correct you in this fashion and this is what's going on. But if you come at them with these conversations, with these corrective measures before they've taken their wall down, I promise you, it's not going to have any influence on their life at all. And so that's how we not only connect with them, hire them, but also retain them and turn them into the most phenomenal employees that they can be. Now, this is really leaving them better than you found them, right? We try to do this with ourselves. We try to improve ourselves every single day. We try to improve our families, the people that we love around us, our coworkers. But why would we not do this with the next generation? Why would we not try to influence them and leave them better than they've been found when we have the opportunity to be the influence while we're still in the seeds, right? And so there's all of these challenges that we can overcome together. But I truly believe that the transportation industry is well versed to do this. Now, as I've been going through all of these, I talk to lots of trucking companies all the time. I talk to lots of different associations. I'm a part of the Women's Trucking Federation Board of Canada. Would love for all of you. We're doing a phenomenal Bridging Barriers conference this spring, right around the long weekend for May 2-4. I think it's the week after. Would love for you to join us. I'll be speaking there as well. And there's a massive group of people. We're going to put on a great conference. But they've been giving lots of these presentations, you know, again and again and again. And people ask me all the time, Hannah, how are we bringing this next generation into transportation? And I, for a while, thought that the answer was Barbie. I thought that working with Mattel to get a truck driver Barbie was the right answer. And I still think that that should happen. So if you've got crazy connections, let me know, because I think that that would be great. But I couldn't continue to be frustrated about something and not have any opportunity to control it. So I made this book called Making It Move, The Wonder Workshop, which is all about bringing transportation to the next generation. So this is actually for Gen Alpha. This is for kids who are 5 and 6 and 7. And if you have anyone that is of that age and you want to help share with them what transportation is and what it means to you in a way that's fun and interesting for them to learn, I would love for you to check it out. It's a great resource to have. You can send me an email. I'll happily send you a PDF of it, or you can go and they're on Amazon if you want a physical copy. But please feel free to reach out to me. I'd love the opportunity to connect with all of you. And thank you so much for coming today. I will stop sharing my screen now and we'll go into some questions if there are any. There should be. I hope
Well, I'm
there's
hoping
at
there
least
will
one or
be.
two.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Hannah, first of all. I just want to thank you for presenting your information with so much understanding and empathy. It's a rare quality when you get that lovely combination of, understanding, empathy, and suggestions. So,
Thank you.
like Hannah said, there's an opportunity to ask her some questions. So you can either use the chat function or the Q&A function below. While I'm waiting to see if anybody has some questions, I have some questions that we came up with
Please.
before. And I was curious with regards to you mentioned mentorship over management and sort of some of the common challenges, I guess, when mentoring. How can we adopt our mentorship or management style a bit better? Like, what would be the three key things you think that we could do instantly now? Everyone leaves this webinar with three things or one thing that you think would
Okay.
be
Well,
a great change for it.
the first thing that comes to mind for me, and it's gonna blow everybody's minds, you're all gonna go, this is a crazy concept. I just want you to ask them. I want you to ask them what they want. I think mentorship specifically, we all have this concept and it's a little awkward because we're like, I want something from you, but it's a relationship. It's not give and take. No one's being paid. Nothing's happening here. It's not consulting. And so oftentimes people can be really uncomfortable about, do you want me to be your mentor? Like, do you I don't want to put myself in that position. Or do you want to be my mentor? Like they're both uncomfortable situations to put yourself. But if you haven't had just a very transparent conversation about it, I would think that's a really good first place to start. Let's just solidify it and intentionally solidify it, and then just ask them what they want. I think is a phenomenal place to start. I think it's so infrequent that people are just simply asked what they want. It's
Yeah.
it's a very easy thing to do, but
Yeah.
it'll help you set the conversation in a
Uh,
specific direction.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you so much. So I was curious to know what you've seen in terms of the Gen Z view on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Is that important to this generation or not as important? As well as mental health and well-being, how that plays
Mhm.
into initiatives that companies have, or are they viewed by Gen Z before accepting a role, or is that something they ask about in interviews?
Great question. I would say that that's a little bit more of a millennial stake in the ground. I think that
Hmm.
DEI has often been brought forward most often by that generation. It was definitely hot and heavy about 5 years ago. And I
Hmm.
think even 3 years ago, it was still very relevant. And today, let me be so clear, it is still very, very relevant. But I think that as it comes to Generation Z, they're going to be talking a lot more about mental health for sure. It's
Okay.
going to be mental health, personal well-being, and connection and support through those things will be much more relevant to them as they come in. So if you're thinking about just your hiring package and how you're talking about that, I would think more about the personal leave days that you offer as well as the sick days and kind of how you can make that a combination, if that makes sense.
Okay. No, that's great. That's a good advice too for, I guess, when you're having those initial interviews as part of selling your company to a new
Mhm,
employee.
mhm.
So going back to that, when companies are trying to connect with Gen Z and those generations, is there a certain branding or messaging that resonates or attracts Gen Z particularly that we
Quick.
should be aware of?
Quick branding. I would say quick branding is your best thing here. There isn't there isn't a color or a slogan or a word that they're necessarily going to be drawn to, but this
Mhm.
next generation does have an insanely short capacity and attention span. Sorry, not
Okay.
capacity, but attention span. And
Hmm.
so when you're thinking about what you're writing, I would recommend that everything just be uh, what's the word I like to use? And you should read this book, Marketing Made Simple. It's really great. It applies to a lot about Gen Zs, but just almost idiot proof in the sense of anybody can understand it. Anybody can read it. I'm passing it. I saw it moving so quickly, but I still got the message. And I
Hmm.
think if you can do that, if you can make it easy enough and readable enough for anybody to understand, that's going to be the most effective way to connect with Gen Z because it'll grab their attention the fastest compared to anything else.
Hmm. So you had mentioned longevity in relation to Gen Z's priority when choosing a is that when they're choosing a company or what motivates them to stay with a company? Like
It would
how do companies build that loyalty with that Gen Z employee over time? If longevity is important to them, what sort of things would be build that loyalty towards the company?
Mhm. I would say that that's really it is both. So it was both. It was a nature of people who were working in current companies and who were also looking for work. It was not just a specific company survey.
Hmm.
But I would say that the best way to kind of sustain that person and help them last longer is continually going back to the listen to learn, learn to understand, and understand to speak. I think
Hmm.
one of the well, there's two main factors to turnover. One would be pay, and then one would be knowing that or feeling, pardon me,
Hmm.
like your management doesn't understand you. And
Yeah.
so for the next generation, if you can help them feel understood,
Hmm.
they will feel safe. And if they feel safe, they will stay.
It's great. That's really interesting. So, what kind of learning and development strategies do you think work then with Gen Z overall when they're in your employee kind of like, I guess, sure, I should rephrase
Like
that.
training they should have.
Training, yeah. Like when you're training, is there a different approach you should take to maybe onboarding or learning and development within a job or a role or something like that that is different than maybe a traditional, here's your binder, dust it off, do the
Yes.
checklist, other than the basic safety stuff, as you mentioned, which is, you must cover. Is there something particular when it comes to those strategies that you would say is a little different with this generation?
I don't think necessarily, no. I think that that is just a nature of sitting down and having, I mean, for lack of better term, the windshield time of just
Mm,
being shoulder to shoulder and having the communication. Um, but in regards to training of your Generation Zs
mm,
as they're coming through, if there's anything that they're needing that is different from the previous generations, I would say
mm,
that soft skills are very valuable to help teach your next generation because of the way that technology and COVID kind of stripped them of some of those very normal experiences. It's
right.
challenging for them to knock on a door and as simple as
Uh,
that they've spent their whole life texting people so the concept of
yes.
going up to someone's door and knocking on it is weird and it's those really funny little things that
Yes.
you can never picture but they come out and you're like what do you mean you don't know
Yeah.
how to do this so
Yes.
but soft skills for sure.
Oh, that's a really great example. Actually, I didn't even think about that, right? Things that different generations are just completely used to doing, a whole other generation due to their experiences are not used to doing those kinds of things. So I'm
Absolutely.
just going to quickly see if there's any more questions. Cliff, are there any more? Are we good?
There are. Please send them through if it's about your employees, if it's about your fellow coworkers, if it's about your kids. If there's any information I have to share, I would love the opportunity to help. So I'm
Wonderful.
happy to.
Cliff, I'll turn it over to
Okay.
you then.
Yeah, okay. Seems no more questions.
No
Thank you
more.
all again for attending today's webinars. On behalf of Manitoba Trucking Association and Supply Train Manitoba, we extend our sincere appreciation to our presenter, Hannah, for sharing her valuable insights and expertise. We will have our recording available on our websites in the next few days. So stay tuned. We appreciate your time and engagement and look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, Hannah. Thank you so much, Supply Chain, Cliff and Carrie. Thank you for helping out today. And a big thank you to one of our things says thank you and bye to Hannah and the team. So again, we'll get that recording out to you as soon as we can. Thank you,
Yeah.
Hannah, for spending time with us today. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Have a
Take
great
care,
one.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.